Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Namaskar, I'm Devdip Purkayastha from Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. Welcome to my course, Business Fundamentals for Entrepreneurs. This is Module 17, which is about business risk and management. But before I deep dive into the module itself, just to remind you of the flow of the course and the topics for weeks 9 to 12, you can have a look at the screen. We are at the first topic, which is business risk and management. So in this module, we'll start with understanding what is a business risk. We'll then talk about different types of business risks, some of which are internal. Risk arising because of factors internal to the company or the business. And then we'll talk about risk arising because of factors outside the company. We'll then talk about some really critical risks, which are called business continuity risk, which can actually shut down a company. And then we'll talk about how do you identify and classify risk, and then how do you manage risk, and then we'll look at an example. Let's look at what is a business risk. A business or a company doesn't work in isolation. There are things happening within the company, and there are a lot of factors outside the company. Some of them are good for the company, some of them are bad. But some of them are real risk to the business's operations, continuity, financial performance, etc. This is also something each of you who are watching this course should consider in your own lives, which is in the area of personal risk. These personal risks are factors or risk which may impact your own financial condition, your own well-being, your own happiness, etc. And some of the risks may be things to do with yourself, your studies, your jobs, your choices, your lifestyle, and some of it may be risk to yourself because of factors other than you, which means factors in the surroundings, in your neighborhood, in your country, in your city, in your politics, etc., which poses a risk to you. Similarly, for a business, these risks, either internal, external, major, minor, unless they're managed, unless they're identified, analyzed, managed on a day-to-day basis, continuous basis, can disrupt the business and sometimes even shut it down. And therefore, the importance of this topic. But let's look at some examples and types of risks. Let's look at risks which arise for reasons outside the company. For example, it could be a market risk. A company is working in a market and there are risks in the market itself. For whatever reason, customers are moving away, competitors are moving in, etc., etc. We'll look at them in details in a while. It could be because of regulatory changes, changes in the law. And we'll look at some examples in the real world. It could also be because of economic risk, because economics also drives businesses. And we'll look at some examples. Let's now look at risks arising to a business because of changes in the market or with the customers. What are some examples? It could be an example where customers have just moved away from the company's product to other kind of products. It could be because new competitors have come in with better products, cheaper products, faster products, or they're coming in with huge advertising money, etc. It could be because of slowdown of demand. There's a general recession and the demand has fallen. That's market risk. It could be price wars because all the players in the market are reducing the prices and the profits shrink. And that's the risk to the company's profit and loss. It could be changes in technology. And it could be changes given by the fact that the market has matured. The market is very old, it's very matured, and there's so many players, the market share of each of the companies are declining. Let's look at an example. Let's look at the audio, the music industry. Decades back, about a century back, people listened to music in a radio. And then the record player came. Some of you may not even know this, but there were big vinyl records which would play in a record player. But then the tape recorder was invented and people moved away from record players to tape recorders. Again, many of you would not have seen a tape recorder. But these are analog recordings. And then you moved into what is called an MP3 digital recording. And then players came out, which are called MP3 players in a CD format, compact disc format. Then MP3 players came out in DVD format. Then MP3 players came out in a small flash memory kind of a format, which is iPod. Then MP3 players or music got embedded into a phone. So most of you in your phones will probably have some music stored. And then the streaming services came. So most of you probably listen to music from Ghana or Amazon Music or any of the streaming music services. So think about it. Think about the businesses which are making record players, very famous companies actually, who faced huge market risk because records became obsolete. The same thing happened with companies and businesses who are making tape recorders. Then think about the companies and businesses which got disrupted because customers and markets moved to MP3 players and from discs, CDs and DVDs into flash memories stored in your phone and then streaming. So many companies faced this market risk, could not adopt and actually died. So these are examples of market risk. Let's move on to regulatory risk. Laws are beyond the control of a company. It's controlled by the government. And if the law changes, businesses can come at risk. For example, emission standards in a car. So in India, there are emission standards, which means the kind of gases that a car is emitting in an engine. Those standards are called BS4. And then a few years back, the government of India said that you need to move to a higher standard of emission, which means lower emissions. And they introduced the BS6, and there's a deadline for all automotive manufacturers to move to a BS6 standard. And I had a car which was BS4. But that model of the car was stopped to comply with the Government of India's higher emission norms, or lower emissions but higher standards of emission control. Similarly, laws can change related to import duties in the country. So if let's say Chinese or American or European companies are exporting into India, which means India is importing them, and the government brings down the import duties, the prices of those Chinese, American, European products will fall. And that makes it a risk for the Indian company. Conversely, if the import duties go up, it's good. It's not a risk, but it's good for the Indian companies. Sometimes, for whatever reason, the government may ban the export of certain products, such as rice, basmati rice, etc. And then it disrupts the company or the business. The government may also change the laws related to manpower. So there are things called minimum wages. And if the minimum wages go up for all the employees, then it becomes a risk to the company's profitability, and that needs to be managed by doing other things. Data protection, cyber security are very big, because nobody, you or me, want our data to be leaked out into the market. And therefore, data protection is extremely important. And the government may pass laws, in fact has passed laws, all countries' government have passed laws in terms of protection of citizens' data, your data, my data. And that requires the company to do certain things. But at the same time, the risk is if there is a cyber hack, there is a cyber breach, then the data leaks out and the company and the business has a big problem. Similarly, intellectual property, trade secrets, trade formulas, if they are not controlled well and the laws change, or there are disputes related to intellectual property or trade secrets, trademarks, logos, that can pose a risk to the company. Because my company may have a logo and we are doing business for years based on that logo, that brand, that trademark, and some other company disputes it and that company wins in court, then I have a problem because I've suddenly lost my trademark or my brand logo, etc. So these are risks related to the laws. Moving on, economic risk. Economy relates to the whole country or sometimes the whole world. And there may be change in the economic conditions globally or in the country which poses a risk to a company or a business. For example, if there's a war, Russia, Ukraine, or in the Middle East, which are impacting the crude oil prices, because India imports a lot of crude and a lot of companies, a lot of products, a lot of businesses, the raw material is crude to produce electricity as a component, let's say for a tire. And if the crude price goes up, the cost of energy goes up, the cost of the petrochemical goes up, the cost of the raw material goes up, that puts a lot of pressure to the company's profitability and therefore becomes a risk to the company. Sometimes, because of the economic conditions, the government may raise or lower interest rates to control what is called inflation, the price rise. If prices rise, demands will fall. It's beyond the company's control. And a falling demand can create a risk for the company's financials. Similarly, if the interest rate goes up, rate-sensitive businesses, for example, housing, where people are buying houses, taking a loan. So if the interest rates goes up, the loans become much more expensive to service because the borrowers have to pay more money as interest. So if the interest rates go up, the home loans become more expensive, fewer people take loans, and the demand for housing comes down. If the demand for housing comes down, demand for cement comes down, demand for steel comes down, demand for paints come down, demand for interior decorations come down, furniture comes down. Similarly, if the interest rates go up, borrowers who are taking a loan to buy a car or a motorcycle or a refrigerator, their interest burden goes up and they will take fewer loans. Then the demand for a car comes down, demand for a motorcycle comes down, demand for refrigerator comes down. And if a car demand goes down, tire demand goes down, petrol demand goes down. These are all economic risks which often work in a chain reaction. It has got nothing to do with the company per se. It has got to do with global and country matters. If there is geopolitical instability, wars, boycotts, sanctions, the economic risk goes up for all the businesses. So these were the risks external to the company. Let's look at risks which come because of factors within the company. This could be related to the operational risks, which disrupts the operation of the company. We'll look at some examples. It relates to the people of the company, the human resources in the company. It would also be because of financial matters within the company itself. These are all internal risks, but they need to be managed. Let's look at operational risk. It could be a very simple risk that a machine breaks down. You're a small unit using one machine, but the machine has broken down. That's operational risk. Or it could be a big company with a long assembly line, with 10 machines, 10 stops. But one machine breaks down, then the entire line comes to a halt. It could be poor inventory management, which means, let's say you are a car manufacturer, a car has 1,000 parts, but somehow one part runs out and the car line stops because of one part. It could be you are a chocolate manufacturer using milk, sugar, and cocoa, but because of poor inventory management, you have run out of cocoa, which is often imported. You cannot produce any more chocolates, and then your business stops. And this also happens because of inefficient supply chain management. A lot of times companies import products. They import from China, they import from US, they import from Europe, they import from Middle East. Or you may be having a plant in Mumbai, but the raw material is coming from UP, or Bihar, or Karnataka, or Madhya Pradesh. But if you run out of inventory, or your supplier doesn't supply you because of some problems between you, your company, and the supplier, your business stops. These are risks that needs to be managed. Similarly, IT, information technology, computers, management information systems, they may break down. Your server may go down. Your internet link may go down. And then the company operations stop. That's a risk. Or you may have poor quality control. You're making a lot of biscuits, millions of packets of biscuits. But then there is one batch of 100,000 biscuit packets which has got insects. That can destroy your business because quality in food is very important. Quality in medicines is very important. Quality in cars is very important. So if you have poor quality control, it becomes an operational risk. People risk. arising because of problems you face in your company because of the employees or the managers or the founders of the company. Sometimes, because of whatever reason, if your employees leave in very large numbers, key employees leave, your salespeople leave you, or your production people leave, or your R&D people leave, the company's operations can be disrupted. It then becomes a risk to the business. If the motivation of the employee is low, if employee feels that he or she is being unfairly treated, and many employees feel like that, they may form an association, which is a legal entity, and resist what the management wants to do. Then it becomes a conflict situation, which becomes a risk, may become a risk. A lot of times there will be conflicts within team members at the leadership team level. So the VP sales, vice president of sales, or the vice president of operations, vice president of finance, they have a conflict. Or in a team, in the sales teams, there's a conflict. So if there's a conflict in the team, then that becomes a risk to the operations of that team. Toxic culture, workplace culture, unhealthy working environment, employees feeling stress, and there have been very unfortunate cases, occasional cases of employees even committing suicide because of work pressure. That becomes a very big risk. It may also happen that the key person, the key founder of the company, the key IP owner, the key inventor, the key R&D head, or the key R&D person leaves the company. When he or she leaves, a key capability lives with him or her, and that becomes a risk for the company. So these are people-related risks. Financial risks. What are financial risks? All companies need cash to work. So cash comes in. With that cash, companies do a lot of things, buy material, make material, sell material, and then they get back cash from the market. So that's called cash flow. But if a company runs out of cash because of bad management or not enough sales or very high cost, if there's no cash, the company goes bankrupt, and that becomes a big financial risk. It could be wrong forecasting of the company's revenues or profits, leading to a problem later on. It could be inability to collect money from the customer. So the customers have taken a product, but they're not paying up. And you have a big risk. It's called a receivables risk. It could be that your business is dependent on only one customer, a very big customer, but he's 80-90% of the business. But if that customer goes, your business stops, or at least 80-90% of your business goes away. So dependability on one product or one customer is a big risk. Your ability to get funds, because if you are poorly managed with poor financials, nobody will give you money. And then you cannot expand, then you cannot compete, then you cannot grow. Because your credit rating, your ability to raise money from the market, from the bank, is low. And of course, there's always the risk of fraud, mismanagement, etc. Or misallocation of funds, in the sense that you've got a successful product where you're not giving enough cash to grow, and you've got a bad loss-making product and you're putting too much money into that bad loss-making product line. So your good product is not growing, good profitable product is not growing, and you're losing money where you're putting in your capital. So these are all financial risks. So let's look at some examples of risks, some of whom I've already talked about. But if you look at the screen, you'll see cybersecurity breach, leakage of data. Your entire customer database has been leaked. Or your confidential production documents have been leaked. Your formulas, your intellectual property has been leaked. Economic recession I've talked about. Supply chain disruption I've talked about. New competitor in market. The classic case of new competitor in market is a case of Nokia versus Apple. Till early 2000, 2002, 3, 4, Nokia was a global leader on smartphones. It dominated India, it dominated Europe, it was strong in US. But then, sometime in 2007, Apple launched the iPhone. The difference was the Nokia smartphones had small screen and you had to press on small buttons to do anything. And there was no music or not much of music, there was not much of apps and nothing. But Apple came in with a touch screen, with a music store, with a lot of apps, an app store and so on. And suddenly the phone, from being just a business kind of a product, became a multi-utility product. And over next 2-3 years, from nothing, Apple went up, up, up and up, till today is one of the most valuable companies in the world, which is one of the most profitable companies and the dominant player in smartphones. And Nokia became history in 2 to 3 years' time. So if you're running a business, watch out for competitive risks. Regulatory changes, I talked about that. One of the big regulatory changes is also increasing awareness of what is called ESG. I've covered it in an earlier module. So companies have to cope or comply with laws which govern the pollution or destruction of nature, environments. Companies have to comply with strict laws related to deforestation or chemical effluent being released into the neighborhood or emission into the air. Similarly, social. There are laws in India such as CSR, and companies have to comply if they're making money with the CSR laws, which requires them to spend a small percent, 2% of their net profits for the past 3 years into doing social good. And that's a law, and companies have to comply with that. Similarly with governance. So regulatory changes, and as I said, as an example, emission laws, ESG laws, etc. Natural disaster, pandemic. COVID was a classic case of how for a period of 3 years, the whole world was disrupted. You, me, everybody's lives were disrupted. Businesses were disrupted. Business died. People died. Businesses died. That's a huge risk. There are new products failing. We've talked about Apple and so on. Foreign exchange rate fluctuation. What happens is that if you are importing products, if your product is based on imported components, for example, you're buying crude in US dollars, and the rupee is depreciating, which means $1 equal to 40 rupees goes up from $1 equal to 40 rupees to $1 equal to 70 rupees. Now the oil price or the component price in dollars may remain the same, but it will spend more rupees per dollar, which means 40 rupees per dollar. Now, if there's a fluctuation, you have to pay and spend 70 rupees per dollar for the same component to be bought from a foreign market, crude or any other component. And that puts a lot of pressure and becomes a financial risk. Merger and acquisition. A lot of time, a small company in India, not a very strong competitor, a big global multinational may come and buy that small Indian company. And then suddenly, the small Indian company has become a subsidiary of a very big multinational, and the competitive power will have gone up manifold because the multinational will then launch new products, put in more capital, bringing in more trained manpower, and so on. So these are risk examples. So with that, please take 3 minutes to reflect on a company that you know and what do you think are the risks that it faces, and what are the likelihood of each of the risks, and what are the likely impact of each of the risks. And as always, please write it down in your course journal so that when you look back into the journal, you can remember everything that you have heard in this course.